Question 1. During the evaluation of a potential significant investment by Bank Negara Indonesia into a large industrial conglomerate, the investment team identifies strong projected financial returns. However, preliminary research suggests potential concerns regarding the conglomerate's environmental impact and labor practices. The team is under pressure to finalize the investment quickly to capitalize on current market conditions. Which approach best aligns with Bank Negara Indonesia's responsibilities and best practices for such a scenario? Option A. Proceed with the investment based on the strong projected financial returns, assuming that any ESG issues can be addressed through future engagement with the conglomerate. Option B. Prioritize a comprehensive due diligence process that thoroughly assesses the environmental, social, and governance-esque risks associated with the potential investment, even if it delays the decision. Option C. Conduct only superficial checks on the conglomerate's ESG performance, relying on publicly available information and industry reputation to gauge risk. Option D. Expedite the investment process by focusing solely on the financial aspects, deferring detailed ESG compliance checks until after the transaction is completed. The correct answer is B. Prioritize a comprehensive due diligence process that thoroughly assesses the environmental, social, and governance-esque risks associated with the potential investment, even if it delays the decision. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate financial interest of Bank Negara Indonesia with the long-term implications of its investment decisions, particularly concerning ethical conduct and regulatory compliance. The pressure to achieve short-term gains can sometimes conflict with the need for thorough due diligence and adherence to the principles of responsible investment, which are paramount in the financial sector. Navigating this requires a robust decision-making framework that prioritizes integrity and compliance. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves prioritizing a comprehensive due diligence process that thoroughly assesses the environmental, social, and governance-esque risks associated with the potential investment. This aligns with Bank Negara Indonesia's commitment to sustainable finance and responsible investment practices, as often stipulated in its internal policies and potentially influenced by broader national financial sector guidelines promoting sustainability. By thoroughly investigating these factors, the bank demonstrates a commitment to not only financial returns, but also to mitigating reputational damage and ensuring long-term value creation that is aligned with societal well-being and regulatory expectations for prudent financial institutions. This proactive risk management is a cornerstone of sound financial stewardship. Incorrect approach is analysis, an approach that focuses solely on the projected financial returns without adequately considering ESG factors, fails to meet the standards of responsible investment. This oversight can lead to significant reputational damage if the investment is later found to be associated with unethical practices or environmental harm, potentially violating Bank Negara Indonesia's internal ethical codes and broader financial sector expectations for corporate social responsibility. An approach that relies on superficial checks or anecdotal information about the target company's ESG performance is also problematic. This lack of rigor can result in overlooking critical risks, leading to potential financial losses and regulatory scrutiny. It demonstrates a failure to uphold the duty of care expected of financial institutions in their investment activities. An approach that prioritizes speed to market over thoroughness, assuming that regulatory compliance will be addressed post-investment, is a direct contravention of prudent financial management and regulatory principles. Proactive compliance and risk assessment are essential, and deferring these considerations can expose Bank Negara Indonesia to significant legal and financial penalties. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework that integrates risk assessment, ethical considerations, and regulatory compliance into every investment evaluation. This framework should include 1. Defining clear investment objectives that encompass both financial and non-financial criteria. 2. Conducting thorough due diligence, including ESG analysis, using reliable data and expert input. 3. Evaluating potential risks and developing mitigation strategies. 4. Ensuring all decisions align with Bank Negara Indonesia's internal policies, ethical guidelines, and relevant national financial regulations. 5. documenting the decision-making process comprehensively. Question 2. Governance review demonstrates that a new digital payment gateway is being considered for rapid deployment by Bank Negara Indonesia to enhance customer convenience. A junior officer in the Operational Risk Department has been asked to approve its integration based on a brief overview from the product development team, who emphasized the urgency of market entry. The junior officer is aware of Bank Negara Indonesia's comprehensive guidelines on operational risk management and the need for thorough risk assessments before implementing new technologies. Which of the following approaches best reflects the professional and regulatory responsibilities of the junior officer in this situation? Option A. Approve the integration immediately to meet the market entry deadline, trusting the product development team's assessment. Option B. Conduct a detailed review of the proposed digital payment gateway against Bank Negara Indonesia's operational risk management framework and relevant circulars, documenting any identified gaps or concerns before providing a recommendation. Option C. Proceed with integration, but advise the product development team to address any potential risks identified by Bank Negara Indonesia post-launch. Option D. Delegate the approval to a more senior colleague in the department, assuming they have a broader understanding of BNI's risk appetite. The correct answer is A. Approve the integration immediately to meet the market entry deadline, trusting the product development team's assessment. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for operational efficiency with the long-term imperative of maintaining robust internal controls and compliance with Bank Negara Indonesia (BNI) regulations. The pressure to expedite a process, coupled with the potential for overlooking critical risk assessments, creates a conflict between speed and diligence. A junior officer must exercise sound judgment to identify and escalate potential compliance gaps without hindering legitimate business operations. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves meticulously reviewing the proposed changes against BNI's established policies and procedures, specifically those related to operational risk management and new product/service implementation. This approach is right because it directly adheres to the principle of regulatory compliance, a cornerstone of banking operations under Bank Negara Indonesia's purview. It ensures that any deviation or new process is assessed for its potential impact on financial stability, customer protection, and the bank's overall risk profile, as mandated by BNI's prudential guidelines. This proactive risk assessment and adherence to established protocols prevent potential breaches of regulatory requirements. Incorrect approaches analysis. An approach that prioritizes immediate implementation without a thorough review of BNI's operational risk framework is incorrect. This fails to acknowledge the regulatory obligation to manage risks effectively and could lead to the introduction of unmitigated operational, financial, or reputational risks, which are subject to BNI oversight. An approach that relies solely on the recommendation of a senior colleague without independent verification against BNI's internal control guidelines is also incorrect. This bypasses the established governance structure and the principle of accountability, potentially leading to the adoption of practices that are not compliant with BNI's directives on internal governance and risk management. An approach that assumes existing controls are sufficient without a specific assessment for the new process is incorrect. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to apply the principles of risk-based supervision as promoted by Bank Negara Indonesia, which requires a proactive identification and mitigation of risks associated with any new operational undertaking. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and risk management. This involves 1. Understanding the specific BNI regulations applicable to the situation. 2. Identifying potential risks and their impact. 3. Evaluating proposed actions against regulatory requirements and internal policies. 4. Escalating concerns or seeking clarification when uncertainty exists. 5. Documenting all decisions and justifications. This structured approach ensures that actions are both operationally effective and compliant with the stringent requirements set by Bank Negara Indonesia. Question 3. Performance analysis shows that a significant portion of Bank Negara Indonesia's operational costs are attributed to its in-house customer service and IT support functions. Management is considering outsourcing these functions to a third-party provider to achieve substantial cost savings. However, The potential impact on service quality, data security, and regulatory compliance needs careful consideration. Which of the following approaches best aligns with Bank Negara Indonesia's responsibilities and regulatory framework? Option A. Negotiate a contract with a vendor based solely on their reputation for low prices, with minimal emphasis on contractual clauses related to data security or service continuity, as these aspects can be managed internally. Option B. Immediately proceed with the outsourcing proposal from the vendor offering the lowest cost, assuming that cost savings are the primary objective and that regulatory compliance will be addressed post-implementation. Option C. Outsource only non-critical functions and maintain all customer-facing and sensitive IT operations in-house, even if this results in less significant cost savings, to minimize potential risks. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive due diligence process on potential outsourcing partners, focusing on their security protocols, financial stability, and track record, while ensuring that any outsourcing agreement explicitly addresses data protection, service level agreements, and ongoing compliance with Bank Indonesia regulations. The correct answer is B. Immediately proceed with the outsourcing proposal from the vendor offering the lowest cost, assuming that cost savings are the primary objective and that regulatory compliance will be addressed post-implementation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for cost reduction with the long-term implications for Bank Negara Indonesia's reputation and compliance with regulatory expectations. The decision-maker must navigate potential conflicts between internal financial pressures and external stakeholder interests, all while adhering to Bank Negara Indonesia's internal policies and the prevailing regulatory framework in Indonesia. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any proposed solution is not only financially sound, but also ethically defensible and legally compliant. The correct approach involves a thorough assessment of the proposed outsourcing, considering its impact on service quality, data security, and customer trust, and ensuring full compliance with Bank Indonesia regulations concerning outsourcing and third-party risk management. This approach is best professional practice because it prioritizes the stability and integrity of Bank Negara Indonesia, aligning with the bank's mandate to maintain financial system stability and protect customer interests. Specifically, it would involve a detailed due diligence process on potential vendors, robust contractual agreements that include clear service level agreements and data protection clauses, and ongoing monitoring to ensure compliance with Bank Indonesia's circular letters and prudential standards related to outsourcing. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost savings without adequate risk assessment would fail to meet regulatory requirements. For instance, proceeding with the cheapest vendor without verifying their security protocols or financial stability would violate Bank Indonesia's guidelines on outsourcing, which mandate a comprehensive risk assessment and due diligence process. This could lead to data breaches, service disruptions, and reputational damage, potentially resulting in regulatory sanctions. Another incorrect approach, such as outsourcing critical functions without proper oversight or contingency planning, would expose Bank Negara Indonesia to significant operational and systemic risks, contravening the bank's responsibility to ensure the soundness of the financial system. This would also likely fall short of the stringent requirements for outsourcing of critical or important functions as stipulated by Bank Indonesia. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that integrates risk management, regulatory compliance, and ethical considerations. This framework should involve 1. Identifying the core objective, cost reduction, and potential constraints, regulatory compliance, service quality. 2. Gathering comprehensive information about the proposed outsourcing, including vendor capabilities, security measures, and financial health. 3. Evaluating the risks associated with each option, considering both operational and regulatory impacts. 4. Consulting relevant internal policies and Bank Indonesia regulations. 5. Seeking input from legal, compliance, and risk management departments. 6. Making a decision that demonstrably balances financial objectives with the imperative to maintain operational resilience, data security, and customer confidence, ensuring full adherence to all applicable regulations. Question 4. Quality control measures reveal that a junior officer at Bank Negara Indonesia has been consistently deviating from established procedures for customer onboarding, potentially leading to incomplete documentation and increased risk exposure. The deviations appear to be driven by a desire to expedite service, but the pattern suggests a disregard for internal policies. Option A. Document the observed deviations internally for future reference but take no immediate action, assuming the officer will correct their behavior with time. Option B. Initiate a formal internal investigation to gather all facts, assess the extent of the deviations, and determine the root cause, while ensuring the officer's rights are respected throughout the process. Option C. Issue a verbal warning to the officer and remind them of the importance of following procedures. Then monitor their performance closely without further formal action. Option D. Immediately suspend the officer pending a review of their employment contract and consider termination due to the potential breach of conduct. The correct answer is B. Initiate a formal internal investigation to gather all facts, assess the extent of the deviations, and determine the root cause, while ensuring the officer's rights are respected throughout the process. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the Bank Negara Indonesia's (BNI) commitment to ethical conduct and regulatory compliance with the practical pressures of business operations. The core tension lies in identifying and rectifying potential breaches of the Code of Conduct for employees of Bank Negara Indonesia and relevant Bank Indonesia regulations concerning internal controls and reporting, while also considering the impact on employee morale and operational efficiency. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the response is both compliant and constructive. The correct approach involves a thorough, objective investigation, guided by established internal policies and regulatory frameworks. This approach prioritizes fact-finding, adherence to due process, and appropriate escalation. Specifically, it aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and the regulatory expectations of Bank Indonesia for robust internal control systems and ethical behavior within financial institutions. By initiating a formal investigation, BNI demonstrates its commitment to upholding its code of conduct and regulatory obligations, ensuring accountability and preventing future misconduct. An incorrect approach that involves immediate disciplinary action without a proper investigation fails to uphold the principles of natural justice and due process. This could lead to unfair consequences for employees and potentially expose BNI to legal challenges. Another incorrect approach, which involves overlooking the issue to avoid disruption, directly contravenes regulatory requirements for reporting and addressing internal control weaknesses. This inaction creates a significant compliance risk and can foster a culture where misconduct is tolerated. A third incorrect approach, focusing solely on external perception without addressing the root cause, is superficial and does not fulfill BNI's responsibility to maintain a sound internal environment and comply with Bank Indonesia's directives on internal governance. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework that begins with identifying the issue and its potential implications. This is followed by gathering relevant information, consulting applicable policies and regulations, such as BNI's Code of Conduct and Bank Indonesia regulations on internal controls, assessing the severity and scope of the issue, and then determining the most appropriate course of action, which typically involves a formal investigation process. This process should include clear communication, documentation, and appropriate escalation to relevant authorities within BNI. Question 5. The evaluation methodology shows that a Bank Negara Indonesia employee, who is responsible for managing a portfolio of high-net-worth clients, has learned that a close family member is planning to invest a significant sum in a startup company. This startup is a potential competitor to a client's existing business, and the employee's family member has asked for the employee's advice on the investment. Believing the employee's insights into the client's industry will be valuable, the employee has not yet made any investment decisions or shared any confidential client information. Option A. Seek advice directly from the client whose business is potentially affected by the startup to understand the client's perspective before deciding how to proceed. Option B. Immediately disclose the potential conflict of interest to the employee's direct supervisor and the BNI compliance department, and refrain from providing any advice to the family member until BNI provides guidance. Option C. Proceed with advising the family member on the investment, assuming that as long as no confidential client information is directly shared, there is no conflict of interest. Option D. Advise the family member on the investment, emphasizing that any information shared is personal and not derived from BNI client dealings, and then inform BNI of the situation. The correct answer is B. Immediately disclose the potential conflict of interest to the employee's direct supervisor and the BNI compliance department, and refrain from providing any advice to the family member until BNI provides guidance. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an employee at Bank Negara Indonesia, BNI, due to the inherent conflict between personal financial interests and the duty of loyalty and confidentiality owed to the employer. The critical requirement is to navigate this situation ethically and in strict adherence to Bank Negara Indonesia's internal policies and relevant Indonesian banking regulations, which emphasize integrity, transparency, and the avoidance of conflicts of interest. The correct approach involves prioritizing the bank's interests and regulatory compliance by immediately disclosing the potential conflict of interest to the appropriate authority within BNI. This aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and the ethical obligations of employees in the financial sector. Specifically, Indonesian banking laws and BNI's internal code of conduct mandate that employees report any situation that could reasonably be perceived as a conflict of interest. This proactive disclosure allows BNI to assess the situation, implement necessary safeguards, and ensure that client confidentiality and the bank's reputation are protected. It demonstrates integrity and a commitment to upholding professional standards. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the investment without disclosure. This failure constitutes a breach of trust and potentially violates BNI's internal policies on conflicts of interest and employee conduct. It also risks contravening regulations that require financial institutions to maintain robust internal controls to prevent insider trading or the misuse of non-public information. Another incorrect approach would be to seek advice from the client directly about how to proceed. This is ethically unsound, as it places the employee in a position of seeking guidance on a matter where their personal interest conflicts with their professional duty, potentially compromising the client's interests and the bank's integrity. Furthermore, it bypasses the established internal reporting mechanisms designed to manage such conflicts. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear framework. 1. Identify the potential conflict. Recognize when personal interests might clash with professional duties. 2. Consult internal policies and regulations. Familiarize oneself with BNI's code of conduct, conflict of interest policies, and relevant Indonesian banking laws. 3. Disclose proactively. Report the situation to the designated supervisor or compliance department without delay. 4. Seek guidance. Follow the bank's established procedures for managing conflicts of interest, which may involve recusal from certain decisions or divestment from the conflicting investment. 5. Maintain confidentiality. Ensure that all discussions and actions remain within the appropriate internal channels. Question 6. The risk matrix shows a potential discrepancy in a customer's transaction pattern that could indicate a compliance issue. As a Bank Negara Indonesia employee, you have a general understanding of the potential implications, but lack the specific expertise to definitively assess the situation or the authority to directly access detailed customer transaction data for investigation. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action? Option A. Immediately access the customer's full transaction history to investigate the discrepancy yourself. Option B. Consult with a senior colleague in a different department for their opinion on how to proceed. Option C. Escalate the matter to the Bank Negara Indonesia compliance and legal departments for their review and guidance. Option D. Wait for the customer to report any issues before taking any action. Correct answer is A. Immediately access the customer's full transaction history to investigate the discrepancy yourself. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for information to address a potential compliance issue with the Bank Negara Indonesia's BNI, strict data privacy regulations, and internal policies. The pressure to act quickly must not override the obligation to follow established procedures designed to protect customer data and maintain the integrity of BNI's operations. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any investigation or information gathering is conducted lawfully and ethically. The correct approach involves escalating the matter to the designated compliance and legal departments within BNI. This is the best professional practice because it adheres to BNI's internal governance structure and regulatory obligations. Bank Negara Indonesia, as a financial institution, is subject to specific regulations concerning data protection and internal investigations. By involving the compliance and legal teams, BNI ensures that the situation is handled by personnel trained in navigating these complex legal and regulatory landscapes. This approach guarantees that any information sought or actions taken are compliant with Indonesian banking laws, data privacy regulations, such as those related to customer information confidentiality, and BNI's own internal codes of conduct. It also ensures that the investigation is conducted in a manner that preserves evidence appropriately and minimizes legal risk to the bank. An incorrect approach that involves directly accessing customer transaction data without proper authorization or escalation would be a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This action would violate BNI's internal data access policies, which are designed to prevent unauthorized disclosure and misuse of sensitive customer information. Furthermore, it would likely contravene Indonesian data protection laws, leading to severe penalties for both the individual employee and BNI. Another incorrect approach, such as ignoring the potential issue due to a lack of immediate clarity, is also professionally unacceptable. This inaction could allow a compliance breach to persist or worsen, exposing BNI to reputational damage, financial penalties, and loss of customer trust, and failing to uphold the duty of care expected of BNI employees. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to regulatory requirements and internal policies. This framework involves 1. Identifying the potential issue and its implications. 2. Consulting relevant internal policies and regulatory guidelines. 3. Escalating the matter to the appropriate internal departments, compliance, legal, risk management, for guidance and action. 4. Documenting all steps taken and decisions made. This structured approach ensures that actions are taken within the bounds of the law and ethical conduct, safeguarding both the individual and the institution. Question 7. The monitoring system demonstrates unusual transaction patterns associated with a specific employee's account at Bank Negara, Indonesia, raising concerns about potential policy violations or illicit activities. Option A. Initiate a formal internal investigation, gathering all relevant data and consulting with the compliance department before taking any further action. Option B. Immediately confront the employee to understand the nature of the transactions. Option C. Ignore the alerts as they might be due to system glitches or temporary anomalies. Option D. Report the findings directly to the employee's direct supervisor for immediate disciplinary action. The correct answer is A. Initiate a formal internal investigation, gathering all relevant data and consulting with the compliance department before taking any further action. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need for operational efficiency and risk mitigation with the ethical imperative of maintaining customer trust and adhering to regulatory requirements. The Bank Negara Indonesia, BNI, hiring assessment test would expect candidates to demonstrate an understanding of how to navigate such situations with integrity and a strong grasp of relevant regulations. The core of the challenge lies in identifying and acting upon potential misconduct without causing undue harm or violating privacy principles. The correct approach involves a systematic and compliant process for addressing suspicious activity. This means initiating a thorough internal investigation, gathering all necessary evidence, and reporting findings to the appropriate internal authorities or, if warranted, to Bank Indonesia as per regulatory mandates. This approach is correct because it aligns with the principles of good corporate governance, internal control frameworks, and the regulatory expectations for financial institutions in Indonesia. Specifically, it upholds the duty to report suspicious transactions or activities that could indicate money laundering, fraud, or other financial crimes, as stipulated by Indonesian banking laws and regulations concerning anti-money laundering and combating the financing of terrorism, APU PPT. An incorrect approach would be to ignore the red flags due to a desire to avoid disruption or potential negative publicity. This failure would violate the regulatory obligation to maintain robust internal controls and report suspicious activities, potentially exposing BNI to significant legal and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach would be to confront the employee directly without proper investigation or authorization. This could lead to premature accusations, destruction of evidence, or legal repercussions for the employee and the bank, and it bypasses established internal investigation protocols. A third incorrect approach would be to immediately terminate the employee's employment based solely on the monitoring system's alerts without a fair and thorough investigation. This would be procedurally unfair, potentially discriminatory, and could lead to wrongful termination claims, while also failing to address the root cause or gather sufficient evidence for any necessary regulatory reporting. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to established policies and procedures, regulatory compliance, and ethical conduct. This involves a structured approach. 1. Recognize and document the suspicious activity. 2. Consult internal policies and relevant regulations. 3. Escalate the matter to the appropriate internal department, e.g., Compliance Internal Audit HR. 4. Conduct a thorough, objective, and confidential investigation. 5. Take appropriate action based on investigation findings, in consultation with legal and compliance teams, and report to regulatory bodies if required. Question 8. The evaluation methodology shows that a candidate for a position at Bank Negara, Indonesia, has recently been offered an opportunity to invest in a private company that is a known supplier to a major financial institution regulated by Bank Negara, Indonesia. The candidate believes this investment could yield significant personal financial returns. Considering the candidate's potential role within Bank Negara, Indonesia, which of the following represents the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Proceed with the investment but refrain from discussing it with colleagues at Bank Negara, Indonesia to maintain confidentiality and prevent any undue influence. Option B. Seek guidance from Bank Negara, Indonesia's compliance department regarding the investment opportunity, disclose the potential conflict of interest, and follow their directive on whether to proceed, recuse themselves from related matters, or divest. Option C. Decline the investment opportunity outright without further consideration, to avoid any potential perception of conflict, even if no direct regulatory breach is apparent. Option D. Invest in the private company immediately to capitalize on the opportunity, as personal investments are separate from professional duties unless directly involving Bank Negara, Indonesia's operations. The correct answer is D. Invest in the private company immediately to capitalize on the opportunity, as personal investments are separate from professional duties unless directly involving Bank Negara, Indonesia's operations. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a candidate applying to Bank Negara, Indonesia due to the inherent conflict between personal financial interests and the duty of utmost good faith and integrity expected of employees in the financial sector. Maintaining public trust and ensuring the stability of the financial system are paramount, and any perception of impropriety can have significant repercussions. Careful judgment is required to navigate situations where personal gain might appear to conflict with professional responsibilities. The correct approach involves prioritizing transparency and adherence to Bank Negara, Indonesia's internal policies and relevant Indonesian banking regulations concerning conflicts of interest. This approach demonstrates a commitment to ethical conduct and regulatory compliance. Specifically, it aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and the prudential standards expected of financial institutions in Indonesia, which often mandate disclosure of potential conflicts and recusal from decision-making processes where such conflicts exist. This proactive stance protects both the individual and the institution from regulatory scrutiny and reputational damage. An incorrect approach that involves proceeding with the investment without disclosure or recusal would constitute a serious breach of ethical conduct and potentially violate Indonesian banking laws and Bank Negara, Indonesia's internal code of conduct. Such an action could be interpreted as insider trading or an attempt to exploit privileged information, undermining the integrity of the financial markets and the institution. Another incorrect approach, such as attempting to conceal the investment or downplay its significance, would demonstrate a lack of integrity and a disregard for established compliance procedures, leading to disciplinary action and potential legal consequences. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying potential conflicts of interest. This involves a thorough understanding of personal financial activities and their potential intersection with professional duties. The next step is to consult relevant internal policies and external regulations. If a conflict is identified, the professional must then disclose it promptly to their supervisor or the designated compliance department and seek guidance on appropriate actions, which may include recusal from specific decisions or divestment from the conflicting interest. This systematic process ensures that decisions are made with integrity, transparency, and in full compliance with legal and ethical standards. Question 9. Investigation of a BNI employee who, while reviewing a client's financial statement for a loan application, incidentally discovers non-public information about an upcoming merger involving a publicly listed company. The employee has a personal investment account and considers using this information to make a profitable trade before the merger is publicly announced. What is the most appropriate course of action for the BNI employee? Option A. Disregard the information as it was obtained incidentally and is not directly related to their primary job function of loan application review. Option B. Discuss the potential investment opportunity with a trusted colleague in another department to gauge their opinion on the information's significance. Option C. Immediately report the discovery of the non-public information and the potential conflict of interest to the BNI Compliance Department or their direct supervisor for guidance. Option D. Proceed with the investment, assuming the information is not yet material enough to cause significant market impact and that personal gain will be modest. The correct answer is C. Immediately report the discovery of the non-public information and the potential conflict of interest to the BNI Compliance Department or their direct supervisor for guidance. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a bank Negara Indonesia, BNI, employee due to the inherent conflict between personal financial interests and the duty of loyalty and confidentiality owed to the bank and its clients. The core of the challenge lies in preventing the misuse of non-public information for personal gain, which could lead to market manipulation, insider trading, and a breach of trust. Careful judgment is required to navigate these ethical and regulatory boundaries. The correct approach involves immediately reporting the potential conflict of interest to the designated BNI Compliance Department or supervisor. This aligns with BNI's internal policies and the principles of good corporate governance, which mandate transparency and the proactive management of conflicts. By reporting, the employee initiates a formal process where BNI can assess the situation, provide guidance, and implement necessary controls to prevent any breach of regulations or internal policies. This upholds the integrity of the financial markets and protects BNI's reputation. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the investment without disclosure, assuming the information is not material or that personal gain is minimal. This fails to acknowledge the potential for even seemingly minor information to become material in certain contexts and ignores the ethical obligation to avoid even the appearance of impropriety. It also violates BNI's internal code of conduct regarding the use of confidential information. Another incorrect approach is to seek advice from a colleague outside the formal compliance structure. While well-intentioned, this bypasses established procedures and could lead to informal, potentially incorrect, advice that does not adequately address the regulatory requirements or BNI's specific policies. This could inadvertently create a situation where the employee acts on flawed guidance, still resulting in a breach. Finally, an incorrect approach is to dismiss the information as irrelevant and take no action. This demonstrates a lack of understanding of the importance of confidentiality and the potential ramifications of possessing non-public information. It neglects the duty of care owed to BNI and its clients, and could expose the bank to significant regulatory penalties and reputational damage. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to internal policies and regulatory guidelines. This involves recognizing potential conflicts, understanding the duty of confidentiality, and proactively seeking guidance from the appropriate internal channels, e.g., Compliance Department, Legal Counsel, Supervisor, before taking any action that could be perceived as a conflict of interest or a breach of trust. Question 10. The evaluation methodology shows that a Bank Negara Indonesia employee, privy to non-public information about an upcoming significant merger involving a major client, is considering how to ethically and legally respond. The employee recognizes this information could lead to substantial personal financial gain if acted upon before it becomes public. What is the most appropriate course of action for the employee to take? Option A. Discreetly inform close friends and family about the impending merger so they can also benefit financially. Option B. Immediately purchase shares of the client company to maximize personal profit before the merger is announced. Option C. Report the information through BNI's designated internal channels for handling sensitive and confidential client information, without taking any personal action. Option D. Wait until the merger is publicly announced, and then consider investing in the client company. The correct answer is B. Immediately purchase shares of the client company to maximize personal profit before the merger is announced. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an employee at Bank Negara Indonesia, BNI, due to the inherent conflict between personal financial interests and the duty of loyalty and confidentiality owed to the employer. Core of the challenge lies in preventing the misuse of privileged information for personal gain, which could lead to market manipulation or unfair competitive advantage. Careful judgment is required to uphold ethical standards and comply with BNI's internal policies and relevant Indonesian banking regulations. The correct approach involves prioritizing BNI's interests and adhering strictly to the bank's code of conduct and confidentiality agreements. This means refraining from acting on the insider information and instead reporting the situation through the appropriate internal channels. This aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and the regulatory expectations for financial institutions in Indonesia, which emphasize integrity, transparency, and the prevention of insider trading. Specifically, BNI's internal policies, likely informed by Otoritas Jasa Keuangan (OJK), regulations concerning banking conduct and market integrity, would mandate such a course of action to safeguard the bank's reputation and the stability of the financial markets. An incorrect approach would be to exploit the information for personal profit. This action directly violates the duty of loyalty and confidentiality owed to BNI. It also exposes the individual to severe legal and disciplinary consequences, including potential sanctions from OJK and criminal charges related to insider trading, as stipulated in Indonesian capital market laws. Another incorrect approach would be to share the information with friends or family. This constitutes a breach of confidentiality and facilitates insider trading by others, making the individual complicit in illegal activities and damaging BNI's reputation. A third incorrect approach, which might seem neutral but is still problematic, is to ignore the information and do nothing. While not actively exploiting it, failing to report a potential breach of conduct or insider information can also be seen as a dereliction of duty, especially if the information could lead to significant market impact or reputational damage for BNI. Professionals at BNI should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes ethical conduct and regulatory compliance. This framework typically involves 1. Identifying the ethical dilemma and potential conflicts of interest. 2. Consulting BNI's internal policies, code of conduct, and relevant OJK regulations. 3. Evaluating the potential consequences of different actions on the bank, oneself, and the market. 4. Choosing the action that upholds integrity, confidentiality, and regulatory requirements, which in this case involves reporting the information internally. 5. Documenting the decision-making process and actions taken. Question 11. The evaluation methodology shows that a candidate for Bank Negara Indonesia is presented with a scenario where a new, innovative financial product is proposed by a third-party vendor. While the product promises significant revenue growth, initial internal reviews suggest it may operate in a gray area of existing Bank Indonesia regulations, with potential implications for customer data privacy and anti-money laundering (AML) compliance. The candidate must decide on the most appropriate framework to guide their recommendation on whether to proceed with the product. Which decision-making framework should the candidate prioritize? Option A. A framework that prioritizes rapid market entry and revenue generation, assuming regulatory compliance can be addressed post-launch. Option B. A framework that seeks informal guidance from senior management to gauge their appetite for risk, bypassing formal compliance channels. Option C. A framework that emphasizes thorough due diligence, comprehensive risk assessment against Bank Indonesia regulations, and consultation with legal and compliance departments before any commitment. Option D. A framework that relies on the vendor's assurances and industry best practices from other regions, without extensive local regulatory scrutiny. The correct answer is A. A framework that prioritizes rapid market entry and revenue generation, assuming regulatory compliance can be addressed post-launch. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a candidate applying to Bank Negara Indonesia due to the critical nature of adhering to the specific regulatory framework, governing financial institutions in Indonesia. The challenge lies in discerning the most appropriate decision-making framework when faced with a situation that could potentially impact the bank's compliance and reputation. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any proposed action aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and the prevailing laws and regulations overseen by Bank Indonesia. The correct approach involves prioritizing a framework that emphasizes thorough due diligence, risk assessment, and adherence to established internal policies and external regulations. This approach is right because it reflects a commitment to responsible business practices, which is a cornerstone of the Indonesian financial regulatory landscape. Specifically, it aligns with Bank Indonesia's mandate to maintain financial system stability and protect consumers, requiring all licensed entities to operate with integrity and transparency. Adopting such a framework ensures that decisions are not only legally compliant, but also ethically sound, safeguarding the interests of the bank and its stakeholders. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate profit maximization without considering regulatory implications would be professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a disregard for the legal and ethical obligations imposed by Bank Indonesia, potentially leading to severe penalties, reputational damage, and loss of public trust. Another incorrect approach that relies on informal networks or personal connections to bypass established procedures is also professionally flawed. This undermines the principles of fairness, transparency, and accountability, which are fundamental to a well-regulated financial sector. Such actions could be construed as unethical and potentially illegal, violating the spirit and letter of Indonesian banking laws. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the problem, followed by identifying all relevant stakeholders and their interests. Next, they should gather information, considering both internal policies and external regulatory requirements. This should be followed by an evaluation of potential courses of action against these criteria, assessing risks and benefits. Finally, the chosen course of action should be implemented and monitored, with a commitment to continuous learning and adaptation to evolving regulatory landscapes. Question 12. When evaluating a potential new business partnership for Bank Negara Indonesia, BNI, with a supplier whose manufacturing practices have been flagged for potential environmental concerns, which decision-making approach best aligns with BNI's commitment to responsible business and regulatory compliance? Option A. Proceed with the partnership if the supplier offers a significant competitive advantage and market share growth for BNI, deferring detailed environmental impact assessments until after the agreement is finalized. Option B. Accept the supplier's assurances regarding their environmental compliance and proceed with the partnership to capitalize on the immediate market opportunity, assuming regulatory scrutiny will be minimal. Option C. Renegotiate the terms of the partnership to include a clause requiring the supplier to address environmental concerns within a specified timeframe, without conducting an independent verification of their current practices. Option D. Initiate a comprehensive due diligence process that includes an independent assessment of the supplier's environmental practices, consultation with BNI's ethics and compliance departments, and alignment with Bank Indonesia's guidelines on corporate social responsibility before making a final decision. The correct answer is A. Proceed with the partnership if the supplier offers a significant competitive advantage in market share growth for BNI, deferring detailed environmental impact assessments until after the agreement is finalized. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Bank Negara Indonesia, BNI, employee because it requires balancing the company's strategic objectives with ethical considerations and regulatory compliance. The employee must make a decision that upholds BNI's integrity while also considering the potential impact on business relationships. Careful judgment is required to navigate the nuances of corporate social responsibility and potential conflicts of interest. The correct approach involves a thorough assessment of the proposed partnership against BNI's established ethical guidelines and relevant Bank Indonesia regulations concerning corporate social responsibility and business partnerships. This approach prioritizes transparency, due diligence, and alignment with BNI's core values and legal obligations. Specifically, it adheres to the principles of good corporate governance and risk management mandated by Bank Indonesia, ensuring that any partnership benefits BNI and its stakeholders without compromising its reputation or regulatory standing. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the potential for increased market share, without adequate due diligence, fails to consider the reputational risks and potential regulatory breaches. This overlooks the importance of ethical sourcing and responsible business practices, which are increasingly scrutinized by regulators and the public. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes the immediate financial gain from the partnership, disregarding the ethical concerns raised by the supplier's practices, demonstrates a lack of commitment to BNI's corporate social responsibility framework and potentially violates principles of ethical business conduct. Finally, an approach that seeks to bypass internal ethical review processes to expedite the partnership, even if the supplier's practices are questionable, undermines BNI's internal controls and governance structures, creating a significant compliance risk. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the core issue and relevant stakeholders. This is followed by gathering all necessary information, including regulatory requirements, company policies, and ethical considerations. The next step involves evaluating potential courses of action against these criteria, weighing the benefits and risks of each. Finally, the chosen course of action should be implemented and reviewed for its effectiveness and compliance. Question 13. Compliance review shows that a BNI client's account has been flagged for unusual transaction patterns. An external party, claiming to be a representative of a regulatory body, has contacted a BNI employee requesting immediate access to the client's transaction history and personal details to investigate potential money laundering activities. The employee is unsure of the legitimacy of the external party and the proper procedure to follow. Option A. Inform the client about the external party's request and ask for their consent to release the information. Option B. Escalate the request to the BNI Compliance Department and Legal Counsel, providing them with all details of the external party and the request, and await their guidance before taking any action. Option C. Immediately provide the requested information to the external party to avoid any potential regulatory penalties for BNI. Option D. Politely decline the request, stating that BNI cannot disclose client information without a court order or official directive from Bank Negara, Indonesia. The correct answer is C. Immediately provide the requested information to the external party to avoid any potential regulatory penalties for BNI. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for information to address a potential compliance breach with the imperative to protect client confidentiality and adhere to Bank Negara Indonesia's BNI internal policies and relevant banking regulations. The pressure to act quickly must not override the established procedures designed to ensure fairness and due process. The correct approach involves initiating an internal investigation that respects client privacy while gathering necessary facts. This approach is professionally sound because it aligns with BNI's commitment to ethical conduct and regulatory compliance. Specifically, it adheres to the principles of data privacy and confidentiality as mandated by Indonesian banking laws and BNI's internal code of conduct. By first seeking clarification from the client and documenting all interactions, the employee demonstrates a commitment to transparency and due diligence, ensuring that any subsequent actions are based on a complete and accurate understanding of the situation, thereby minimizing the risk of wrongful accusations or breaches of trust. An incorrect approach would be to immediately disclose the client's transaction details to the external party without proper authorization or a clear understanding of the request's legitimacy. This action would violate client confidentiality, a cornerstone of banking ethics and a strict requirement under Indonesian banking regulations. Such a disclosure could lead to severe reputational damage for BNI and legal repercussions for the employee and the bank. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the request entirely, assuming it is an overreach. While client confidentiality is paramount, a complete disregard for a potentially legitimate inquiry, especially one that could flag illicit activities, could also have negative consequences. BNI has a responsibility to cooperate with lawful requests for information under specific legal frameworks, and failing to investigate or respond appropriately could be seen as obstructing justice or failing to uphold regulatory obligations. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes understanding the nature of the request, identifying the requesting party's authority, and consulting internal policies and legal counsel when in doubt. This framework involves 1. Assessing the request. Is it from a legitimate authority? What is the stated purpose? 2. Consulting internal policies. What are BNI's procedures for handling such requests? 3. Seeking clarification. If the request is unclear or potentially sensitive, engage with the client or the requesting party to understand the scope and necessity. 4. Escalating. If there is any ambiguity or potential for regulatory breach, escalate to the compliance department or legal counsel for guidance. Question 14. Analysis of a situation where a candidate for Bank Negara Indonesia, BNI, is offered a significant investment opportunity in a technology startup that is a potential future client of BNI. The candidate believes this investment could be personally lucrative and potentially beneficial for BNI if the startup thrives. What is the most appropriate course of action for the candidate to take, adhering strictly to Indonesian banking regulations and BNI's ethical guidelines? Option A. Discuss the investment opportunity with a trusted senior colleague at BNI to gauge their opinion before making a decision. Option B. Decline the investment opportunity outright to avoid any potential for perceived or actual conflict of interest without further consultation. Option C. Proactively disclose the investment opportunity to BNI's compliance department and seek guidance on managing any potential conflict of interest. Option D. Proceed with the investment discreetly, assuming it will not influence professional judgment and could benefit BNI in the long run. The correct answer is C. Proactively disclose the investment opportunity to BNI's compliance department and seek guidance on managing any potential conflict of interest. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a candidate applying to Bank Negara Indonesia, BNI, due to the inherent conflict between a potential business opportunity and the strict ethical and regulatory obligations governing financial institutions in Indonesia. BNI, as a state-owned bank, operates under a stringent framework designed to maintain public trust, ensure financial stability, and prevent conflicts of interest. The decision-making process must prioritize adherence to these regulations and ethical principles above personal or perceived business gains. The correct approach involves a proactive and transparent disclosure of the potential conflict of interest to the appropriate internal channels within BNI. This aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and the ethical codes expected of employees in the Indonesian banking sector, which are often reinforced by Bank Indonesia regulations and internal BNI policies. Such disclosure allows BNI to assess the situation, manage any potential risks, and ensure compliance with all applicable laws and regulations, thereby safeguarding the bank's reputation and integrity. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the investment without disclosure, assuming it would not impact professional duties. This failure directly contravenes the principles of integrity and transparency expected of BNI employees. It could lead to actual or perceived conflicts of interest, potentially violating regulations related to insider trading, market manipulation, or general ethical conduct as stipulated by Bank Indonesia and BNI's internal code of conduct. Another incorrect approach would be to seek advice from a colleague without formal reporting, as this bypasses established internal control mechanisms and may not provide a definitive resolution aligned with regulatory requirements. Finally, attempting to conceal the investment or downplay its significance would be a severe ethical breach, undermining trust and potentially leading to disciplinary action and legal repercussions. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying potential conflicts of interest. This involves recognizing situations where personal interests could influence professional judgment or create an appearance of impropriety. The next step is to consult relevant internal policies and external regulations, such as those issued by Bank Indonesia and BNI's Code of Conduct. If a conflict is identified, the framework dictates immediate and transparent disclosure to the designated authority within the organization. This allows for proper assessment and management of the conflict, ensuring that decisions are made in the best interest of the bank and its stakeholders, and in full compliance with legal and ethical standards. Question 15. The evaluation methodology shows that a BNI employee, privy to non-public strategic information regarding an upcoming BNI product launch that is expected to significantly boost the company's stock price, is approached by a close friend who is looking for investment opportunities. The friend asks for insights into potential market movements. How should the BNI employee ethically and compliantly respond, considering Bank Negara Indonesia's regulatory obligations and internal policies? Option A. Discreetly share the non-public information with the friend, emphasizing the need for secrecy to help the friend make a profitable investment. Option B. Advise the friend to invest in BNI stock based on the employee's personal belief in the company's future success, without revealing any specific non-public information. Option C. Immediately report the situation to their direct supervisor and the BNI compliance department, seeking guidance on how to handle the friend's request and avoid any potential conflict of interest or breach of confidentiality. Option D. Politely decline to discuss any investment opportunities, stating a general policy of not discussing personal investments or market insights with friends without disclosing the specific reason. The correct answer is A. Discreetly share the non-public information with the friend, emphasizing the need for secrecy to help the friend make a profitable investment. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge for an employee at Bank Negara Indonesia, BNI, due to the inherent conflict between personal financial interests and the duty of loyalty and confidentiality owed to the employer. The critical requirement is to navigate this situation ethically and in strict adherence to Bank Negara Indonesia's internal policies and relevant Indonesian banking regulations, which emphasize integrity, avoidance of conflicts of interest, and the protection of proprietary information. The correct approach involves prioritizing BNI's interests and regulatory compliance above personal gain. This means proactively disclosing the potential conflict of interest to the appropriate BNI authority and seeking guidance or approval before proceeding with any action that could be perceived as compromising. This aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and the ethical standards expected of financial professionals, as well as the regulatory framework governing Indonesian banks, which mandates transparency and the prevention of insider trading or misuse of information. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the investment without disclosure, assuming the information is not material or that personal gain is paramount. This failure constitutes a breach of fiduciary duty and potentially violates Indonesian banking laws and BNI's code of conduct regarding conflicts of interest and the use of non-public information. Another incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the advice of a friend without considering BNI's internal policies and regulatory obligations. This demonstrates a lack of professional responsibility and an insufficient understanding of the stringent compliance requirements within the banking sector. Professionals at BNI should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying potential conflicts of interest. This involves recognizing situations where personal interests could influence professional judgment or where confidential information might be leveraged for personal benefit. The next step is to consult BNI's internal policies and relevant regulations. If a conflict is identified, the framework dictates immediate disclosure to the designated supervisor or compliance department. This proactive communication allows BNI to assess the risk and provide clear direction, ensuring that actions taken are compliant and ethically sound. The ultimate goal is to uphold the integrity of BNI and the financial system. Question 16. The evaluation methodology shows that a new junior analyst at Bank Negara Indonesia, BNI, needs to understand the transaction patterns of a specific customer segment to inform a new product development strategy. The analyst, eager to contribute, considers accessing the bank's core customer database directly to extract detailed transaction histories for this segment. Option A. Access the core customer database directly to extract detailed transaction histories for the specified customer segment. Option B. Formally request the required transaction data through the designated internal reporting channel, adhering to BNI's data access and privacy protocols. Option C. Ask a senior colleague in a different department to provide a summary of transaction patterns for the customer segment. Option D. Rely on publicly available market research reports to infer the transaction patterns of the customer segment. Correct answer is A. Access the core customer database directly to extract detailed transaction histories for the specified customer segment. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the strict regulatory requirements of Bank Negara Indonesia, BNI, regarding data privacy and customer confidentiality. A new employee eager to impress might overlook established protocols, leading to potential breaches of trust and legal repercussions. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all information gathering adheres to the established legal and ethical framework governing BNI's operations. The correct approach involves a structured and compliant method of obtaining necessary information. This means understanding the limitations imposed by Bank Negara Indonesia's internal policies and relevant Indonesian banking regulations. Specifically, it requires recognizing that direct, unauthorized access to customer data is prohibited. Instead, the employee should follow the established channels for requesting information, which typically involve formal requests through designated departments or supervisors who are authorized to access such data and can provide it in a manner compliant with privacy laws. This upholds the principle of data protection and customer confidentiality, which are paramount in the banking sector and are strictly enforced by Bank Negara Indonesia. An incorrect approach that involves directly accessing customer account details without proper authorization demonstrates a disregard for BNI's internal control framework and potentially violates Indonesian banking laws concerning customer data privacy. This action erodes customer trust and exposes the bank to significant legal penalties and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach, which is to ask a colleague for the information without following the official request procedure, bypasses established security protocols and can lead to unauthorized disclosure of sensitive information. This is also a breach of BNI's internal policies and may have legal implications under Indonesian data protection regulations. A third incorrect approach, which is to infer the information based on general market trends, is insufficient for making a specific business decision and fails to address the core need for precise customer data, while also not adhering to any established BNI procedure for data acquisition. Professionals at Bank Negara Indonesia should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. This framework involves 1. Identifying the objective and the information needed. 2. Consulting BNI's internal policies and relevant Indonesian banking laws to understand permissible methods of data acquisition. 3. Evaluating potential approaches against these regulations and policies. 4. Selecting the approach that is both effective in achieving the objective and fully compliant with legal and ethical standards. 5. Documenting the process and seeking guidance from supervisors or compliance officers if any ambiguity exists. Question 17. Research into an upcoming strategic partnership for Bank Negara Indonesia, BNI, has provided an employee with non-public information about a significant potential acquisition. The employee realizes this information, if publicly known, would likely increase the share price of the target company. The employee has a personal investment portfolio and is considering making a substantial investment in the target company's shares before the partnership is announced. What is the most appropriate course of action for this employee? Option A. Discuss the situation with a trusted colleague to gauge their opinion on the ethical implications before making any decisions. Option B. Make the investment and then, after the announcement, report the transaction to the compliance department as a matter of record. Option C. Proceed with the investment, assuming the information is not yet material enough to be considered insider trading and that the personal gain will not be detected. Option D. Immediately disclose the potential conflict of interest and the non-public information to their direct supervisor and the BNI compliance department, seeking guidance on how to proceed. Correct answer is D. Immediately disclose the potential conflict of interest and the non-public information to their direct supervisor and the BNI compliance department, seeking guidance on how to proceed. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an employee at Bank Negara Indonesia, BNI, due to the inherent conflict between personal financial interests and the duty of loyalty and confidentiality owed to the employer. The employee's knowledge of an upcoming strategic partnership could lead to personal gain through undisclosed investments, which directly contravenes ethical conduct and regulatory expectations for financial institutions. Careful judgment is required to navigate this situation without compromising BNI's integrity or violating applicable regulations. The correct approach involves prioritizing BNI's interests and adhering to the company's code of conduct and relevant Bank Indonesia regulations concerning insider trading and conflicts of interest. This approach requires the employee to immediately disclose the potential conflict to their supervisor or the designated compliance department. This proactive disclosure allows BNI to manage the situation appropriately, potentially by recusing the employee from further involvement in the partnership discussions or by implementing other safeguards. This aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and the regulatory framework that mandates transparency and the prevention of market abuse. Specifically, Bank Indonesia regulations, such as those pertaining to prudent banking practices and the prevention of conflicts of interest, would underpin the necessity of such disclosure. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the personal investment without disclosure. This action constitutes a breach of trust and potentially violates regulations against insider trading, as the employee is leveraging non-public information for personal benefit. Such behavior undermines market integrity and exposes BNI to significant reputational and legal risks. Another incorrect approach would be to rely on the assumption that the information is not truly material or that the investment is small enough to go unnoticed. This demonstrates a disregard for the spirit of the regulations and the ethical obligation to act in the best interest of the employer. The employee's personal judgment about the materiality of the information is irrelevant when dealing with non-public, price-sensitive information. A third incorrect approach would be to seek advice from a colleague who is not in a compliance or supervisory role. This could lead to the spread of sensitive information and potentially involve another employee in a breach of conduct, further compounding the ethical and regulatory issues. Professionals at BNI should employ a decision-making framework that emphasizes ethical conduct, regulatory compliance, and the protection of the institution's interests. This framework involves 1. Identifying the potential conflict of interest or ethical dilemma. 2. Consulting BNI's internal policies, code of conduct, and relevant Bank Indonesia regulations. 3. Seeking guidance from the appropriate internal authority, such as a supervisor or the compliance department, to report the situation and understand the required course of action. 4. Acting in accordance with the guidance received, prioritizing transparency and the avoidance of any appearance of impropriety. Question 18. Benchmark analysis indicates that a long-standing and high-value client of Bank Negara Indonesia, BNI, has inquired about the potential impact of an upcoming, unannounced regulatory change on a specific sector where the client holds significant investments. The client is seeking specific insights that could inform their investment decisions before the change is publicly disclosed. Option A. Directly provide the client with details about the upcoming regulatory change and its anticipated impact on their investments, explaining that this information is being shared as a courtesy to a valued client. Option B. Provide the client with a general overview of the sector's current market conditions and potential challenges without directly addressing the rumored regulatory change or its specific impact. Option C. Politely inform the client that BNI cannot provide any specific insights or predictions regarding potential regulatory changes due to strict confidentiality and market integrity policies, and suggest they consult publicly available information or their own independent advisors. Option D. Share your personal opinion on how the regulatory change might affect the sector, based on your understanding of market trends and client interactions, while emphasizing that this is not official BNI guidance. Correct answer is C. Politely inform the client that BNI cannot provide any specific insights or prediction regarding potential regulatory changes due to strict confidentiality and market integrity policies, and suggest they consult publicly available information or their own independent advisors. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Bank Negara Indonesia, BNI, employee due to the inherent conflict between client relationship management and adherence to strict regulatory guidelines concerning insider information. The employee must navigate the delicate balance of maintaining client trust while upholding BNI's commitment to fair market practices and preventing market abuse, as mandated by Indonesian financial regulations. The core of the challenge lies in discerning when a client's inquiry crosses the line from general market interest to a request for information that could be considered material non-public information, thereby posing a risk of insider trading. The correct approach involves prioritizing regulatory compliance and ethical conduct above immediate client satisfaction or potential business gain. This approach requires the employee to recognize the sensitive nature of the information requested, understand the potential implications of sharing it, and proactively seek guidance from BNI's compliance department. This aligns with the principles of prudent banking and the regulatory framework established by Bank Indonesia and Otoritas Jasa Keuangan (OJK) concerning market integrity and the prevention of insider trading. Specifically, it upholds the spirit of regulations that aim to ensure a level playing field for all market participants and protect the reputation and stability of the financial system. An incorrect approach that involves providing the client with the requested information, even if framed as an educated guess or general market observation, constitutes a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This action could be interpreted as facilitating insider trading, which is a serious offense under Indonesian law. It breaches the duty of confidentiality and the obligation to act with integrity, potentially exposing both the employee and BNI to severe penalties, including fines and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach, which is to dismiss the client's inquiry without proper consideration or escalation, fails to uphold the professional responsibility to manage client relationships effectively and to identify potential regulatory breaches. While it avoids direct disclosure, it misses an opportunity to reinforce BNI's commitment to compliance and could lead to a perception of unresponsiveness, potentially harming the client relationship without addressing the underlying regulatory risk. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear framework. 1. Identify the potential regulatory risk. Recognize when a client's request might involve material non-public information. 2. Consult internal policies and compliance. Refer to BNI's internal guidelines and immediately engage the compliance department for clarification and direction. 3. Prioritize regulatory adherence. Ensure that any action taken strictly adheres to Bank Indonesia and OJK regulations. 4. Document all interactions. Maintain a clear record of the inquiry and the actions taken. Question 19. Comparative studies suggest that financial institutions often face dilemmas when client requests appear unusual, but are not explicitly prohibited. For Bank Negara Indonesia, BNI, employee handling a significant non-standard transaction for a long-standing client that raises mild concerns about its origin of funds. Which of the following approaches best aligns with BNI's regulatory framework and ethical obligations? Option A. Proceed with the transaction as requested, prioritizing client satisfaction and assuming the client has legitimate reasons, given their long-standing relationship with BNI. Option B. Inform the client that their transaction is being flagged for potential suspicious activity and ask them to provide detailed proof of the fund's origin to avoid reporting. Option C. Immediately report the transaction as suspicious to the relevant authorities without further internal investigation, to err on the side of caution. Option D. Conduct a thorough internal review of the transaction, gathering additional information from the client and internal BNI records, and escalate to the compliance department if red flags persist, adhering to BNI's internal AML/CTF policies and Bank Indonesia guidelines. The correct answer is A. Proceed with the transaction as requested, prioritizing client satisfaction and assuming the client has legitimate reasons, given their long-standing relationship with BNI. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge for a Bank Negara Indonesia, BNI, employee due to the inherent conflict between a client's request and the bank's regulatory obligations. The employee must navigate the delicate balance of maintaining client relationships while strictly adhering to the principles of anti-money laundering (AML) and counter-terrorist financing (CTF), as mandated by Bank Indonesia regulations. The core difficulty lies in discerning whether the client's transaction, though seemingly unusual, crosses the threshold into suspicious activity that requires reporting, without prematurely alienating a valued customer. The correct approach involves a thorough, objective assessment of the transaction against established BNI internal policies and Bank Indonesia's AML/CTF guidelines. This means gathering all necessary information, documenting the due diligence process, and escalating the matter for internal review if any red flags are identified. This approach is ethically sound and legally compliant because it prioritizes the integrity of the financial system and fulfills the bank's statutory duty to report suspicious transactions, thereby preventing BNI from being used for illicit purposes. It aligns with the principles of prudence and due diligence expected of financial institutions under Indonesian law. An incorrect approach of immediately fulfilling the client's request without further scrutiny would be a significant regulatory and ethical failure. It bypasses the essential risk assessment process, potentially allowing for the facilitation of money laundering or terrorist financing, which is a direct violation of Bank Indonesia's AML/CTF regulations. Another incorrect approach of dismissing the transaction as routine without adequate investigation also fails to meet the standard of due diligence. This oversight could lead to the bank being unaware of and complicit in illicit activity, exposing BNI to severe penalties, reputational damage, and legal repercussions. A third incorrect approach of directly informing the client about the suspicion and the reporting process would violate the principle of tipping off, a serious offense under AML/CTF laws, which aims to prevent criminals from being alerted to investigations. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework that begins with identifying the core issue and relevant regulations. This is followed by gathering facts, assessing risks against established policies and legal requirements, consulting internal compliance departments when necessary, and documenting all actions and decisions. The framework emphasizes a proactive, risk-based approach to compliance, ensuring that client relationships are managed responsibly within the bounds of regulatory adherence. Question 20. The evaluation methodology shows that a Bank Negara Indonesia employee is aware that a close relative is seeking a significant loan facility from the bank. The employee has a direct role in the loan assessment and approval process for that specific branch. What is the most appropriate course of action for the employee to uphold professional integrity and comply with Bank Negara Indonesia's operational guidelines? Option A. Avoid any involvement in the loan application process without formally notifying anyone, hoping the situation resolves itself without their intervention. Option B. Immediately disclose the familial relationship to their direct supervisor and the compliance department, requesting guidance on managing the potential conflict of interest. Option C. Discreetly advocate for a more favorable loan term for the relative, believing it is a minor personal favor that will not impact the bank's risk assessment. Option D. Proceed with the loan assessment and approval process as usual, assuming personal objectivity will prevail and the relationship will not influence their professional judgment. The correct answer is B. Immediately disclose the familial relationship to their direct supervisor and the compliance department, requesting guidance on managing the potential conflict of interest. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an employee at Bank Negara Indonesia, BNI, due to the inherent conflict between personal interests and the fiduciary duty owed to the bank and its clients. The core of the challenge lies in maintaining integrity and avoiding even the appearance of impropriety, which is paramount in the financial sector. Careful judgment is required to navigate situations where personal relationships could potentially influence professional decisions or create conflicts of interest. The correct approach involves a proactive and transparent disclosure of the relationship to the relevant internal authority at BNI. This aligns with BNI's internal policies and the broader regulatory expectations for financial institutions in Indonesia, which emphasize ethical conduct, conflict of interest management, and the safeguarding of client interests. By disclosing the relationship, the employee demonstrates adherence to principles of integrity and accountability, allowing BNI to implement appropriate measures to mitigate any potential risks, such as reassigning the client or ensuring independent oversight of transactions. This approach upholds the trust placed in BNI by its clients and the public. An incorrect approach that involves proceeding with the transaction without disclosure fails to acknowledge the potential conflict of interest. This is a direct violation of ethical principles and likely contravenes BNI's internal code of conduct and potentially relevant regulations concerning conflicts of interest in banking. Failure to disclose creates a hidden risk that could lead to biased decision-making, unfair treatment of the client, or reputational damage to BNI. Another incorrect approach, which is to subtly influence the transaction to favor the relative, represents a severe ethical breach and a potential violation of banking laws. This action directly undermines the principle of fair dealing and could constitute misconduct, leading to disciplinary action and legal repercussions for both the employee and potentially BNI. It prioritizes personal gain over professional responsibility and client welfare. Finally, an incorrect approach of ignoring the relationship and hoping it doesn't impact the transaction is a passive but equally problematic stance. It demonstrates a lack of awareness or a deliberate disregard for the potential for conflict. Professional decision-making in such situations requires active management of risks, not passive hope. The professional reasoning framework should involve 1. Identifying potential conflicts of interest. 2. Consulting BNI's internal policies and ethical guidelines. 3. Disclosing the conflict to the appropriate supervisor or compliance department. 4. Following BNI's prescribed procedures for managing the disclosed conflict.